Welcome back to Inside Politics. Our guests today are Dr. Reavis Mitchell from Fisk University. He's a history professor there, and David Ewing, also a Nashville historian. We're talking about Nashville's role in the civil rights movement in the early 1960s, specifically the sit-in movement, along with, we'll talk a little bit as well about the Freedom Riders, which we've mentioned before. David, not all the efforts to desegregate facilities in Nashville were praiseworthy, despite what happened with the sit-ins. Because there were efforts to desegregate the city-owned pools, the city just decided to close them. That's really one of the more shameful events that have happened in Nashville's civil rights history.
The same period of time in the early 60s, Howard Gentry, who's our criminal court clerk, and Kwame Lillard, whose father was in the city council, they tried to go swim in the swimming pools in Centennial Park. And we all know how hot it gets during the summer. Kids want to be in the swimming pool, and those were segregated. And when basically the courts or the Metro Legal or Nashville Legal Department said you could not keep African Americans out, the response of the city was, as opposed to let black and white children swim together, they filled all the swimming pools up with cement and closed them. And
Dr. Mitchell, just because the sit-in movement succeeded downtown, there continued to remain, even after the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which desegregated public facilities. There were still restaurants and other places in town that would not allow blacks to come in, and there continued to be protests and demonstrations.
There were other commercial developments. You might look at much of the discussion about why Green Hills Mall was developed very differently than downtown. It would be a private section. There wouldn't be initially bus service to the mall. It would come later on. So all these type of activities. But as David mentioned, it moves the onus from just business to everyday life. Swimming pools, parks, all of that had to suddenly respond to the spirit of the age. And it's not amazing that young Howard Gentry and young Kwame Lillard were just, young teenagers. We understood, they understood, I'm a bit older, that things were going to change, that they had to change. So the catalysts that were set forth with those sit-in movements moved through America. I point out, I think the modern civil rights movement was the beginning of social concerns and the social movements that so much are part of American life today. It's ironic the way we celebrated Dr. King's birthday this year, that so many groups of people were organized, bringing about change. It's disappointing that in 50 years, many of the same issues that were prominent 50 years ago are still today and even highlighted, but it's the way we address things now.
David, in that regard, it took a long time for Nashville to finally name a road in honor of Dr. King. We had a bridge in Bordeaux named after him, but not a road.
And we'll give credit to the Metro Council, particularly Sharon Hurt. She led the effort. There's this joke in the African American community that most cities have a Martin Luther King Street, but it's in a very kind of poor section, or it's in the African American section of town. We put it in one of our most prominent sections, including
right in front of the state capitol.
The address of the state capitol is now Martin Luther King Boulevard. So 50 years after his assassination in Memphis, there is a street named for him in the Tennessee State Capitol.
Dr. Mitchell, there's a lot of, we've mentioned a lot of names of the students that were leaders in all this. When the sit-in movement was more or less concluded here in Nashville, at least in the downtown area, they moved on to perhaps an even more perilous opportunity. They got involved with the Freedom Riders. And the Freedom Riders actually were folks that rode the Greyhound and the Trailways and the other buses across the Deep South. Even though there had already been Supreme Court rulings that those had to be desegregated, they weren't being desegregated, and they took their lives in their hands riding those buses.
And this was a national movement. This movement was clocked and followed by the White House, by President Kennedy, and by his brother. When things got really desperate, they would send a representative, John Siegenthaler from Nashville, to be a part to cover it.
And he almost got killed.
And he almost got killed. So this moved our little discussion here from a very local discussion to a national discussion about how you change.
So David, when people want to learn more about this, they obviously ought to go to the Civil Rights Room at the Downtown Public Library. It is a unique resource for Nashville.
Yes, there are videos, there are books, there are photos, there are quotes on that wall. It's whether you're 5 years old or 90 years old, you could learn something from going to that room.
Is it important?
And the local universities have repositories too. Wonderful primary sources at Tennessee State University, and in the special collections and with Fisk, original letters and papers.
And I mentioned now that Woolworths is a restaurant across from the arcade. To me, that building has just as much to do with American history nationally as Andrew Jackson's Hermitage, the Ryman Auditorium, or our Tennessee State Capitol.
So many new people that have come to Nashville over the years. Whole generations have grown up since that time. Do you find it's important to do this not so that you can just be remembered, but so that people can learn it really did happen here and how that may be helpful to what's going on today?
That's right. And why it happened here. What was the atmosphere in Nashville would allow? It wasn't an accident. It was very much planned. It was very much thought out that you'd have this sort of change in what we then referred to often as the Athens of the South. You'd have greater democracy, greater participation coming out of Nashville.
So, David, in the context of the overall civil rights movement, it's not necessarily thought that Nashville was at the center of that throughout the effort, but it certainly was the center early on.
We're not in the history books as much because we didn't have the violence of Birmingham and the church bombings and the violence of Selma on Bloody Sunday, or the kind of 200,000 people and King's Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. But we planted the seed, and we sent John Lewis and Diane Nash and all these other people around the country, and that's how our role is very important.
Dr. Mitchell, as we face what's going on right now with police violence and other things, it's important to remember those things because people didn't think they could be solved in those days, but they were.
Right, exactly right. It was a cooperation between government responding to what the people wanted. And that's a large story of Nashville, to a responsive government. You can't say too much about Ben West. He had a good relationship with the black community for years.
Dr. Mitchell, thank you for being here. David Ewing, thank you as well. And thank you for joining us on Inside Politics. Hope you'll be back here again for a future show. If you can't get off politics in the meantime, go to the News Channel 5 website. You'll find my Capitol View commentary there. There's new commentary posted every Friday afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll see you back here next time. Goodbye.